Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about
building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant and subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
Welcome to the Curious Folks podcast for those challenging the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Effy Blue.
I'm Jacqueline Misla, and today we're speaking with Mistress Lucy Sweetkill about Daddy. Mistress Lucy is a professional and lifestyle dominatrix, BDSM educator, Kinky Life Coach, and purveyor of mindful domination. After spending years sharpening her skills and training other dominas in commercial dungeon in New York City, she decided to go off on her own. Her independence allowed her to expand her BDSM interests and connect with more like-minded individuals. She offers 101 and 102 type sessions for novices and couples to masterminding large group scenes with the goal of guiding individuals through their BDSM and erotic journey. She's an entrepreneur at heart with a business degree to back it up. Lucy co-founded La Maison de Rouge, a company focused on holistic approach to BDSM experience. And over the last few years, LMDR has been focused on expanding the BDSM experience by discussing, educating, and informing their audiences about the intersex of kink, wellness, sexuality, spirituality, and social activism. And today, we have the great pleasure of tapping into that wealth of experience to talk about a topic that you personally have been waiting years to discuss.
Absolutely. I don't know how long we had Daddy on our list of topics to explore, but it has been that forever.
Yes.
Every time we make our list of, okay, what are we curious about? Who do we want to talk to? Daddy's
You're
in
like,
there.
Daddy! I want to know about Daddy.
Totally. I think it was on our list for the last consider this. It's always that. It's always that. And finally we found somebody
We're indulging Daddy.
Yeah. And she was amazing,
She was great.
I mean, it's interesting to me for a few reasons. First of all, it used to be so much more of a subversive space, like the term daddy and sort of the play that is around daddy, that power exchange particularly with that daddy energy used to be really, really subversive. Like it kind of like people kind of whispered around it, and it was like it made that people were like, oh daddy, like even the kinky people like who were like kinky people would be like, oh daddy, like that's a whole other thing. And then in the last few years it's become like noticeably mainstream.
Right. They're like daddy hats, daddy t-shirts.
Totally. And people like drop it in conversation, like celebrities joke about it. It's like, it's become so mainstream. And I'm like, I've been curious about this for years. And suddenly it's mainstream. Like, why? I want to know why. And for me, it's interesting because I am not particularly, like, it doesn't do it for me, right? We're going to explore this a little bit, Mistress Lucy. It just doesn't do it for me. I've tried it. I've had partners who are like, call me daddy. I'm like, I don't know. Like, I've said it. I've played in those scenes. It just never does it for me. But of course, your kink is not my kink, but your kink is okay.
I'm just picturing you being like, daddy? Like, you're just not happening.
Exactly. That's like where I am.
Not having the oomph that they were asking for when you
totally. And it's not that I'm not icked by it automatically. I've of course, like anything else, I'm like, I'll try it at least twice. So I went there, and it just doesn't do it for me. I have some theories to why.
Yeah. Tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I have a very close relationship with my dad, and it's not a typical parental relationship. Like, as far as I can remember, it felt more peer-like. We always discuss things. Like, everything was open for discussion. I call him by his name as much as I call him dad. We've worked together at times, and we've explored things. Like, we'll go into a topic and we'll like explore something. So it has a much more of a peer energy than like a parental energy. So I think when daddy comes up in that sexy space, in the erotic space and playtime, I think just like too close. It's just like too close. It's just too close to the bone. It's like the person that I would play with in that space is a peer, and then like my actual relationship with my dad is like kind of that peer energy, and they're just like too close for comfort, and then like I get all confused, and then it's like in my brain I'm trying to sort things out, and I've got like thoughts coming up, and I have feelings coming up, and I have memories coming up, and it's just like all confusing. Then I'm in my head trying to organize everything and put things in one corner, like I'll deal with this later, and then I'm like, why is this coming up? And then once I'm in that space, that's not fun or sexy at all. I'm like disconnected. Like I'm not in the erotic place. I'm disconnected from the playtime and the person. So, you know, by the time I'm done processing this thing, you know, people are like, erections have gone. And
right, you've just been sitting there in silence for 3 minutes and they're all looking at you, wondering what's happening.
Exactly. So I'm like, okay, let me not ruin playtime for everyone. So I like opt out of that. I opt out of that particular kink. But I'm fascinated by it, you know, because so many people are into it. And you're one of those people.
Yes, I am into it. Yeah. Well, let me say, I'm not into it broadly. So I do use daddy with my partner. And interestingly, you know, certainly I think this is one of the first things that people wonder. I have no daddy issues. So my father had kind of a regular dad, if you will. I had someone who was emotionally available and loving and what one would hope and assume. I mean, certainly there's stuff. We can have a whole episode about stuff with my parents, but nothing out of the ordinary that makes me feel like I have any daddy issues. And I've never called him daddy. So maybe that's the distinction, but there wasn't anything there for me. And I don't know why it never bothered me as a term. Now, let me also say culturally, I'm Puerto Rican. Within my culture, people will call each other, you know, mama or papa or mommy or papi. And that doesn't mean mom or dad. And so maybe also within that, I just got comfortable with disassociating those things because I've used papi, I've used daddy with my partner, and neither of those things at any moment have ever triggered. Like at no moment have I ever said that and was like, oh no, my father. That's not it for me. I think for me, and I was thinking about this because you and I've talked about this for years, like what is it about that word that just feels like the word? Like, you know, when you're having a conversation or something happens, I don't curse a lot. So I don't know if folks know this about me, but I very rarely curse. I curse when I am either really mad, turned on, or if it's going to make the joke funnier. Like those are really the three situations in which I'm going to say a curse word. But there are times where like shit is the word you have to say. Like there's no other word that can capture it as much as like fuck, right? And so similarly, I think like there isn't another word that when I want to say like daddy, like there's just not another word that like captures what I'm trying to say. And Lucy references a quote by Sonny Megatron that says, relationship with a daddy is more like being able to let go of one's responsibilities and let a warm, dominant figure take the reins. The daddy is responsible for taking care and of punishing when it's necessary. And that, when I read that, I was like, yes, that is exactly what it is. I mean, it is big dick energy. Well, in my case, it's big strap-on energy. It is about me letting go and receiving instructions. It's about restraint. It's about my partner denying me of something like the permission to orgasm. Like it is all of the things of I am giving away my power, and I trust the journey that we are going to go on together as a result. And you know my partner, and we're actually going to be doing an episode with her soon. She is light and joyful and laughs a lot. And like her energy is just like youthful and loving and light. But there is this, like when she switches on, I'm getting tingly even now. In my mind, I could she's like one person in the world and like loves dogs and just again has just like the biggest laugh and is sweet and warm and loving. And then she just can like switch to this energy that just
I know what you're talking about. I know her. I've spent time with her. I've spent time with you too. And I completely agree with you. I think from the outside, like a person who just knows her, like sees like the lightness. I've definitely seen in her eye in her eyes. I'm like, oh, I see what's happening behind that. And then of course I hear it from you too. I'm like, yes, I see it. So it's and it makes sense. That's why actually it does. I have to say this. It does make sense that like you and her and Daddy kind of makes sense to me. Like it doesn't confuse me as it could. Like I think overall I find it just confusing because of the experience that I've just said. Like I just get confused. But when I think of you and Alexis and Daddy and all that dynamics, I'm like, it's a no-brainer. That totally makes sense. Like, why am I so surprised? You know?
Clearly, she's her daddy.
Yeah. I just think that definitely happens for sure. That's so funny.
So now that you know more about Effy and I than you thought that you would, let's take some time to learn about Mistress Lucy and about Daddy. And we hope that you enjoy the interview.
So, hi, Lucy.
Hello.
So this conversation has been in the docket for a long, long time. Years in the making, and one of our biggest thing was to find the right person to help us navigate the space. So, and then we got connected to you, and you did an excellent presentation on this. So I was like, yes, like this person needs to come on the show and help us navigate the space of Daddy. I know that this has been, out, these days, been out on the mainstream now, but I know that people who are hearing it for the first time or don't know enough about it are curious. So, like, where does it come from? Where does, how does Daddy play out in kink? Let's start from there.
It's interesting having someone who identifies as a woman speaking about the daddy role, because, the origins of Daddy and that idea of like the father figure that is outside of a family dynamic really comes from like, for the most part, mainstream gay and leather culture. Actually, the word daddy first, what they can, from what they can find out was like, it really first appeared in jazz and blues music, which was very interesting. And it was something within African-American culture of a woman who would call her lover. And it really didn't matter the age, because usually that daddy figure or that, the daddy name has to do usually with age specifically. But this was more about a woman who would consider her lover that when it appeared in jazz and blues music. But there are also some other terms, prostitutes who would refer to their pimps as daddy, but then really the popularization in gay culture, which is the leather daddy. But it really has to do with usually an older individual in relation to a younger individual within gay male culture. And usually that person, yes, there's a sexual component, but also sometimes it's more of a mentor, coach, guide. And sometimes it didn't have to be sexual. It could be someone who kind of helped a younger gay male, navigate the world of, navigate coming out and navigate his new life of understanding the gay lifestyle as well.
Yeah, I'm interested because I know that you've talked about part of the fun of Daddy now is that it does play with gender roles. It does make people confront their identities. And so you name that, being a cis woman, using that word and what it has meant for you. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how it went from being a part of the gay culture to something now that folks of any gender identity are really utilizing in their play?
Yeah, so I think what it has transformed to, right, is it's just a symbol or a representation. And we're now speaking, especially for those who are not actually like cis men, right, or who are not actually father figures. It now just represents this, I think, yes, there can be an age component, but it represents what that archetype is, someone who can be what the father figure archetype is, which is someone who can kind of like take control, guide you, likes being in power, who likes to be more of that dominant figure, who feels really secure in themselves. So I think now it's more representing those things compared to your actual gender identity anymore. And I really loved, the quote from, Sunny Megatron is, an educator within the kink community as well. And she has this quote because she wrote this like really great article about it, but she's like, a relationship with a daddy is more about being able to let go of one's responsibilities and let a warm, dominant figure take the reins. The daddy is responsible for taking care of and punishing when it's necessary. And I really loved what she had to say about this because that's really what it represents, right? And for me in BDSM, so I use the term daddy, or the term daddy is referred to me and I embrace it because it represents my power dynamics with my subs. And most of my subs, not all, but most of them are cis men. And I do have some cis female subs as well who call me daddy. And that's what I represent, is someone who takes control, but also will punish them when necessary.
Nice. I'm curious how it differs from any other sort of dom space, right? It's very specific, right? There's master, there's like other dom labels, and there's like doming energy, and power play, shows up in many, many different ways. I'm curious to what the distinction is that makes daddy versus a master or sir or any other kind of terminology that's used in kink for power play.
I think you can have many titles, and it differs per person, and it differs per relationship, and it differs per moment. Like, that's kind of the beauty of it. Some days with my subs who call me daddy, some days I'm not daddy. Some days I'm just mistress. And some days, I don't connect with the term mommy at all, because even though I am mama bear to other doms, most of my peers will sometimes call me mama bear because I tend to have that like momness with them, but I do not like it with any of my subs, like at all. That's not the mommy dominant energy I enjoy. And there are other doms who love the term mommy because it has, and again, we're talking about archetypes, not like your own family affairs, right? Because for me, I didn't really grow up with a father, but we all kind of have an idea of what fathers are supposed to be in our life, right? At least what they're supposed to represent in a lot of like most cultures. And so for me, I think playing with the term daddy is like tapping into those ideas for folks, what daddy can be. But I think like the difference between those multiple terms is like, again, you don't have to stick to just one. Like some of my subs, like daddy just doesn't connect with them. Like it's weird for them to, like, they know that some people call me daddy and they're just like, cool, but that's not for me. And it's not for them either. Like, I do have subs who will sometimes call me daddy and I'm like, this is not our dynamic. Like, it's got to be consensual on both sides too. Like, for me as a dominant, when I use the term daddy with a certain sub or have them call me daddy, there is a certain energy that's being exchanged. And it can be very scene-based, meaning just within play. It can be just in that moment of our play, but not ongoing. And then there's folks, it's ongoing. It is an ongoing thing that they call me even outside of play. That also has to be predetermined, and it is really determined on this very unique level. So you're not stuck to it. If you want to play with the term daddy in your personal life, try it out with different people, try it out at different moments and see where it fits. Because sometimes it doesn't fit. Sometimes it just doesn't feel right. But sometimes it fits for a scene or a certain moment or a certain person. And that's okay. I interviewed two DOMs who use the term daddy, but I also interviewed two dominant who doesn't use the term daddy and why, and also a sub who loves the term daddy and a sub who doesn't like the term daddy. And both of those subs were in relation to me. So, these are subs who do serve me, and their view of me are totally different. And my relationship are totally different with them. And so I asked them specifically, why do you choose, or why do you like the term daddy towards me? And then they spoke about it and what that represented. And it was very much in line with what Sunny Megatron said, you keep me safe and you guide me, and, you're strong-willed and you will punish me if necessary. But the sub who doesn't use that term towards me, who is my sub as well, he's just like, it's very personal for him. It purely has nothing to do with me. It's more about him. And he's just like, I don't know. I don't like that term because like I have a dad and it's like weird because my relationship with him is really close. So to call somebody else daddy would feel weird. It had nothing to do with me. It purely only had to do with him. So that's, reasons why too.
That resonates with me, right? The reason that I give why, even though I'm fascinated by daddy and daddy energy and daddy in play and all these things, and this is why this is, long time coming. That's the reason that I struggle with it. I have a specific relationship with my dad that is, we're very close, and it doesn't feel like a parental relationship. It's always felt more like a peer relationship, and it just feels almost like too close. Like the relationship is too close. The people that I would be interested in calling daddy, that relationship and my sort of close peer relationship with my dad are just too close, and the wires cross. And once the wires cross, then I just can't find the erotic energy there. And it's just like I just it's weird for me. I talk about like how it just like gets me into a confusing space. And once I'm in that confusing space, it's not sexy, I'm just like in my head. So it really, that piece resonates with me. Like, why would somebody be like, oh, it doesn't work for me? And I'm just curious about like, how do people arrive there? Like, how do you stumble into knowing that daddy is going to work for you in a sexy scene,
By trying. Really, that's all it is. That's the great thing. Like BDSM, the reason why we use the term play when we talk about having a scene or interacting with somebody else, right? We use the term play a lot, like, oh, so let's play, because it's adult games. And if you remember being a kid, right? Like, how do you know how to play any of the games you would make up? Like a lot of times I would play these imaginary games with my friends and my cousins and my family. And they weren't board games. They weren't any of that. We would just use our imagination and we would be superheroes and supervillains and play house and play all this. Like, we didn't really know any of those or what they did. It was playing. You try it out and you be a character you want to be and you see if it works. And this is the exact same thing. I didn't realize how much I would love the term daddy until really like later in my exploration in BDSM. And that was not because I chose it, because it was actually said to me in a session by a sub. And that sub, who I actually interviewed, Shine, I think just like blurted it out in the scene. Like I forget how it actually happened, but he's a rubber and whip fetishist. So he is a bit of a masochist, and I love whips. And so we were having this really fun but intense whipping scene. And I think like I gave like a really hard, stroke. And he was just like, "Oh, daddy." And I was just like, "I'm into that." I was like, yeah, that's it. And so it's not sometimes even predetermined, right? I think that's the beauty of BDSM play. I always tell people this. When you come in, if you want to explore kink and BDSM, first off, try to come without expectations, because then it allows you to fully experience and see where it goes and what kind of connects. But it's okay if something doesn't, you can evaluate at the end. And those terms, the verbal that comes out, you just never know where it's going to come out. And it might, somebody might say something. And I think we all have experience, of this in some sexual context. Someone says something, you're like, "Oh, that's kind of hot. I wasn't expecting that." Keep going with whatever thing you're continuing to say, right? I think that's the great part of it.
Yeah. So I'm interested, if somebody wants to embody daddy energy in play, what would you recommend? Because what I hear you saying, it is connection as well as control, that it's domination, but with trust, that it is the balance of both the divine female and divine male energies, in that it's the male energy, the divine male energy around the plan and the guidance and the control. But I hear you also saying that there is a caretaking role in there that's involved. So if someone wants to embody that energy, what could that look like?
Well, first, yes, daddy is definitely on the dominant side. So, and that's my opinion. I don't know if I feel like most people would agree on that. Like most people who use the term daddy are definitely dominant. So if you identify as submissive, that might not be a term you want to use for yourself. So it's definitely a dominant role. To embody that, I would say, like, first kind of ask yourself, like, what does that term mean for you? Because I think some people use terms, even the term mistress or even the term master, even they hear these terms and they don't fully know what they mean, but they hear them because it's like now become so mainstream, right? But I think it is important to do a bit of self-reflecting and ask yourself, words are powerful. So if you're going to use a title or use a word to represent yourself, because that's what you're doing, using the term daddy to represent yourself, ask yourself, what does that mean to you? What comes up for you emotionally? What are the thoughts that come up? So if you can sit there and like tap into like what it means to you to, that first off, that word, then you can start digging into like, well, how would that be represented? How would I connect to the term daddy? Because everyone sees daddy figures a little differently. And I think they definitely have a bit of caretaking, but they are, for me, the daddy term is very tough love. So when I use the term daddy, when I connect with it, when my subs use it, it's because of my willingness and ability to give extremely tough love. And so that for me is how I embody it, by understanding what daddy means to me. So with someone really wanting to embody that, I think they really need to look inside of themselves and ask themselves what that term means to them, compared to trying to create it based on other people's ideas. Also, I've seen this happen, and I think that's why some people don't connect. Like Effy, like you were saying, right? Like that term daddy just feels weird to you, right? So if you just sat there and said, the term daddy, could I use it? Could I say it? What does it mean to me? Then you're going to come up with the answers and understand that there's no way to embody this. There's no way, because it doesn't connect with you. You have to feel connected to you. But for those who are really curious about it, then if they sit with it and they're like, oh, I kind of like that term, it kind of means this to me, then you're at the start of starting to embody it. Then if you're bringing in somebody else into this, because usually you would, you really want to talk to them about what that term daddy means, because it still needs to be consensual. People forget that those words are meaningful to folks. Like, I don't allow anybody to just call me daddy either. I have subs who will sometimes try to call me daddy because they see me posting about it on social media, and they'll try to use that with me. And I go, no, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. That's not our relationship yet. So you really also have to talk to who is going to be using that term with you as well. It's not a one-sided embodiment of daddy. It really isn't. It has to be okay with both parties, because again, like I said, my sub, if I told him to call me daddy, he'd be like, that's weird. I don't like that, you know? And then that just messes up our whole dynamic.
I think it's just a complex space. So I can't imagine there to be really simple answers. I think it is a complex space. I think that's why I find myself curious about it. Even though it doesn't work for me personally, it doesn't get me into the erotic space, I'm fascinated by it because I do think it's complex. I think where it comes from, how it gets embodied. And I'm interested, like we're talking a lot about the sort of daddy side of this energy, the dom side of this energy, the top side of the energy. I'm curious about the sub counterpart for daddy. Who, why, when, what, all the questions. How do they show up? Where does it come from? What are some of the experiences that you've had that kind of can give us an idea of the counterpart archetype?
Before I speak of that, I was just thinking that's kind of interesting. Daddy is a word that represents a lot, right? Just as much as mommy or anything else. However, it also is just a word, meaning when you are playing and finding your kind of erotic energy and sexual energy and what turns you on and what doesn't turn you on, right? Words, for some people, they like words. For other people, they don't. So if you just hear the word and there's some mental and physical tingling sensation that comes over you, then you might be into it a little. Just as much as if you see something and you're like watching something and there's an image of something that comes on where you're like, oh, that's kind of hot. You might be kind of into that, right? Mm-hmm. So if you if you're watching a movie and some woman comes in with like thigh-high stockings and lingerie, or, even, a dominatrix looks, or there are so many things people fetishize, then you most probably are kind of into that. You may not know fully, but if there is some sort of reaction that's happening in your mind and in your body, in your physical body, then you most probably are into it. So if you hear someone use the term daddy and it piques something for you, then you might want to explore that and play with that, because I think that's something you might be into. So for bottoms or subs, whatever you identify as, for those who are into the erotic daddy role play or terminology, it's because they find that term hot, right? They hear the term daddy and they're like, yeah, like that feels hot to me. Well, some people hear that and they're like, eh. Just like when my sub yelled out, oh, daddy, after whipping him, I was like, yeah, that's hot, And like, I didn't even have time to think about what it meant to me. I had no time to think about what it meant to me, if it had any. It was literally a full body experience of like, yeah, I like that. I like that you yelled that out. I like that you're using that. And all of a sudden I became Daddy Lucy. In that moment, and forever after that, I became Daddy Lucy to this sub, and he became Shine Girl, or Baby Shine Girl, or Shine Baby Girl, like variations. We kind of play with it. And so we have a full gender fuckery. Mm-hmm. It's a mix of gender fuckery, familiar fuckery. Like, we're just like mixing it all up, because I'm much younger than him. I am a cis female. So we're just playing and mixing it all up. And he's not Shine Girl to everyone, because he also calls someone, he actually just likes the perversion of family figures.
Wow.
So one of my mentees is cousin Lily, and he has an auntie, and he has a mama, and he has a doctor. So it's just play. It's playing with words and seeing what's hot for you. And as you try them, does it work for you? So on the bottom side, it can be variation. It doesn't matter what your gender is. You can identify as baby girl. You can identify as baby boy. You can identify as just baby. You don't even have to identify as baby to still have a daddy or a mama. You can just be you and I'm just daddy. Or you could just purely be, my female sub. She's just good girl and I'm daddy. And she's just a good girl, being a good girl for daddy. That's all it is.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, it's super, super, super interesting. And I love how you're talking about it in a way that feels accessible, right? You're kind of saying, look, just try it out. It's not a big deal. Like, it sounds like a big deal, but it's not. Like, try it out, see how it feels for you on the dom side. Try it out with, a partner, see how it feels like on the sub side. And that your take on it is like both sort of fun and light and playful and insightful and nerdy at the same time. So it just like sounds so accessible when you talk about it.
It is. It's just, well, BDSM and kink is quite accessible. People are just, they get stuck on the pain aspect, but it really doesn't have to include pain. BDSM is not about pain. More than anything, it's about power and giving up power sometimes and control. But BDSM is actually, and kink, it's quite silly. Most of my scenes, I've been a professional dominatrix for 11 years. And what I get asked a lot is like, how are your sessions? And I think they're expecting to hear like this dark and heavy and, intense and mean situation. But if you like actually was a fly on the wall, there's so much laughter and ridiculousness and like random role plays that go into the most ridiculous like scenarios. I've been a Bond villain, I've been a TSA agent, I've been all kinds of things. It's made to be fun. It's just made to be sexy and fun and not very serious. Yes. Is there some serious moments? Yes, you can do that. But for the most part, it's about just having fun. It's about playing and tapping into like your sexual curiosity, that I think we've lost as we've gotten older because of like the messages in our society. It's just about being curious about your body and being curious about your interest. And doing that with other people where it shouldn't be filled with shame. I really do a lot of reflection on like my childhood and me now, because there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of similarities in the sense that like the days of being able to just be on the playground, have fun, not have a care in the world, make up games, not feel judged for whatever weird game you made up, people playing these little roles and just like, and sometimes, a kid would get hurt, right? Sometimes you run around and then scrape your leg and then keep going and all of those things. And it was just like being curious and creative and connecting. And that's exactly what I do as a dom. I want to create curiosity and connection and just fun. And like, daddy should be something that you have fun with. It doesn't have to be so serious. So I always want people to like, play with their gender identities, play with their labels, see how it goes. Be a top, be a bottom, be a daddy, be a mommy, be a cousin, be a whatever, and see, and be okay. Like, what is one of the most popular porn categories? Like stepbrother, stepmother. Like, obviously we're into these things. So let's not like pretend we're not, because those are like one of the top like 5 categories that people search for.
It's true.
So there is something there. So instead of being afraid of it, like, enjoy it, because it's all, as long as you have consenting adults, then what's the problem?
Here is all I have to say to that. Here.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Yeah. And I was actually going to ask you the question, and you started to touch on it, is around some of the surprises and myths that you've uncovered in your work and your research. And I think you started to talk about that I think that we think about dungeon spaces and it feels very dark and serious. And I love that you're saying, and we're just playing and we're being silly and we're laughing. And any other kind of things, any myths that you want to dispel about daddy, any surprises again, kind of in your experience?
First off, way more people love to use the term daddy than they will admit. Like, I get people who are always like, because they know that I have it on my social media. And so some people will like straight out and reach out to me and be like, Daddy, I would love to schedule. And I'm just like, we don't even know each other. Why are you using that term with me? And I'm just like, and it's because they're into it, because they're not calling me, like, you could have easily used the term most people know me by, which is Mistress Lucy Sweetkill, but you made a choice, which tells me a bit about your fantasies and your kinks. And so, like, way more people are into this than anyone wants to admit. I think that's a big thing that people forget about. They talk about it, they're like, oh, that's weird. And I'm like, no, it's not. I know most of you are like saying this in your like personal lives at some point. I talk to my friends, my vanilla friends, and they're just like, oh yeah, she called me daddy. And I was like, oh, in bed. So what's, how did you feel about
that? Not so vanilla after all.
But I think also the misconceptions in my line of work, and especially about kink and BDSM, is that first, that it has to always involve pain. It really doesn't. Pain is just a small part of it. So those who are afraid are thinking like, oh, well, it's going to be whips and chains and I'm going to be like, a leather paddle, or, like, it doesn't have to involve all of it. Yes. Is that the fun part for me? Yes, but it doesn't have to. It's really psychological more than anything. And it's more about just exploring your fantasies and your kinks, and allowing someone to be your guide and guide you through that. I try not to use the term dungeon when I refer to my play space, because I know that you hear dungeon and you're just like, uh-oh. And I like the term play space better, because that's really what it is. It's a place of play, even if it includes pain. And most doms are so much nicer than people think. I get that all the time. They're like, very nice. And I'm like, most doms are actually really nice. I find that most doms tend to be very level-headed, because you have a lot of power and you have a lot of control, and you have to wield that in a positive way. It comes with a lot of responsibility. So I find most doms to be much, at least pro doms, to be very like sweet, nice, communicative, because those are all the skills we have to have in our line of work.
Yeah, no, I've definitely noticed that. We spoke to Michelle last episode. We've definitely hosted people, especially professionals, and that is definitely a thread that we've observed as well. Everyone's like super nice, super accessible, super light, like is willing to, talk about things in such a like, accessible, fun, bubbly kind of way. So you're like, oh, I think it also challenges and changes the myths around sex workers and professionals within that field as well. I think there's also, that's what we explored in the last episode. There's all these misconceptions about people who do this work. And then the more we, host people like you, I think it's also bringing to our audience like, oh, actually, it's not what you think. People who do this professionally are brilliant. They're good at their job. They know what they, have an enormous amount of wisdom. They want to play, they want to bring you along. They want to have fun with you. It's not just like a transaction. They actually want to like play with you as well and have fun and really enjoy that experience as well. And they're doing it from a place of wisdom and knowledge and care. So I think that's really important as well. And this conversation just for me is reinforcing that as well. We have one question from our followers that I will love to pass on to you before we jump into the quick fire question.
Cool.
So the question that we got on Instagram is, what does power exchange mean to you?
Wow, that's a really big question.
Big question, right? The whole other episode, we'll have you back for just that episode.
What does power exchange mean to me? In the simplest way, it's actually quite straightforward. It's an exchange of power. It is a choice for one party or one individual to give up control and power to another who's willing to accept that and use it. So that's the simplest way. In the more complex, nuanced idea of power exchange, for me, that's a big reason why I love kink and BDSM and why I've stayed in this career for so long. That really is my kink, actually, is power exchange and power dynamics. I get an immense erotic, thrill and charge. It is my motivator in all of this, beyond just being like a total pervert, but a motivator is the power aspect. And I think for me, it's such a combination of things. I think on a personal level is I grew up with no power at all. I grew up very poor. I grew up in an immigrant family. My parents came here from the Vietnam War. They didn't speak much English. Then my mother was a single mother of two kids. And so there was a lot of and there's a lot of trauma and abuse in my background. And so I grew up with just not feeling like I had power or control of anything in my life. Moved around like a million times. So I think my fascination and why I've come to eroticize power is because of my lack of power in most of my life, and being an adult and being able to have power was very healing, but also being given power has been very healing. So my engagement in kink and BDSM, and especially my subs giving me power to do what I want to do, of course, within limitation context, like consenting to say, hey, I'm giving you my power and I trust you to do what you want to do with it, not only healed me around not having power, but it also healed my relationship with men specifically. And it showed me that there are men specifically out there who are not here to just use their power to take, that there are those who understand that they do have power, but they want to give it and they want to let go and they want to submit to it. And that is something immensely beautiful and healing, especially for women of all types who most likely have experienced some form of trauma at the hands of men. So that for me is also what power exchange means, is someone who is used to having power in just day-to-day world and giving it to someone who is not used to having that power. That is more meaningful to me than someone who is not used to having power and giving up that power, But they're also allowed to have that too. Like for those who are not used to having power, who then choose to submit, I don't think, I think the mindset for them is a little different. I don't know if it's about giving up power, but I think it's about embracing the fact that they don't have power in a safe space with someone who cares for them compared to the world that doesn't. So I think that looks a little different, but I'm specifically talking about the exchange that happens for those who have power, giving it to someone who usually doesn't have power.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that. That's incredibly insightful. And your level of self-awareness that you're talking about this and how it expands into like sort of your own space to the macro space of like our power dynamics in our society, gender roles. That was great. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I love the balance between us. We were just talking about how light it is and playful, and that the roots of it are deep, particularly around being, a person of color and being a woman and having to live and navigate through a space that is so rooted in power dynamics, that if we can create spaces for ourselves where we can exchange that power and do it in a way that feels safe and do it in a way that's playful, I think that it helps to uncover more and more why scenes and why working with a professional or why doing this within, partnership or play, like creating spaces wherever possible to be able to dig into this joy, to begin to dig into these depth, to begin to dig into all of the things that feel complicated and messy. I love that you are not only giving us permission to do that, but also illustrating the power and play of it. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you will allow us to indulge you in 4 questions, so that you shared a lot about yourself. I'm hoping that we can find out just a little bit more with 4 rapid fire questions.
Cool. Yep.
So the first is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self about love, sex, or relationships?
Follow your gut. I think for females specifically, women specifically, we put our gut, feeling, our intuition, our gut, we put it to a side, we question it because we're told to, we get pressured, right? Just like really follow your gut. Just completely believe in yourself in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, here. Yeah, it's a great advice at any age. Okay, so what is one romantic or sexual adventure on your bucket list?
Well, I wonder if my partner is going to giggle at this, but I'm always trying to get him to explore his sort of like homoerotic side, even though he doesn't identify that way and he's not very sexually fluid. But I'm always trying to push him to be a little more sexually fluid and have like 2 beautiful fit men, him and another man, just worship me. So I am, this might be surprising for people, but I do talk about it. I'm on the asexuality spectrum. That's how I personally identify. And so there's a lot of misconceptions around asexuality. I'm very kink focused, power focused. But when it comes to maybe traditional heterosexual sexual interactions, I am not orgasm focused and I am not penetrative focused. And I personally identify being on the asexuality spectrum. So when I talk about the sexual fantasies I have, having my male partner and another male partner worship me, it's more about just the mental and the physical worship compared to like trying to like penetrate me or orgasm. I'm not talking about a 3-way in that way. That has no interest for me. I'm not interested in that type of 3-way. I am interested in being carried around by these 2 men and showered and bathed and lotioned and pampered and kissed all over my body and just them doing exactly what I want them to do.
Sounds
nice.
That's
very much like goddess energy.
Yes, it's very goddess.
Like goddess energy, like worshiping. I love it. It's hot just listening.
And I appreciate you naming that you are on the asexuality spectrum. We had a conversation with Angela Chang about her book Ace. And part of that conversation was about debunking things and looking at all the myths around asexuality. And so I don't think that it would be commonly thought that someone could be asexual and be a dom and be engaged in loving sexual relationship. And you're like, yes, I am, and this is what it looks like. And so I think it's just important to name that for folks who are feeling some sort of way in their feelings based on what they think they're expected to do and how they're expected to show up. And so again, permission and inspiration to do it differently. I love it. This question feels incredibly self-evident, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Miss Lucy, how do you challenge the status quo?
In all honesty, I think I do it by being very public. I do have the privilege of being very public with who I am as like a pro-dom, as a BDSM educator, as a woman who, works in the sex industry, because I have such an amazing support network. My family is super supportive. My family is amazing, super supportive. My friends are just like amazingly supportive. My partner, who I never thought, like, that's a whole other episode of dating and being a sex worker alone. But, I never thought I would actually meet a partner, because I had so many bad experiences, that would accept what I did, not, as a pro-dom. And my partner of 4 years is like my biggest cheerleader, and he's not even kink identified. He's quite vanilla, to be honest. Like, he's so open-minded, but he's not, I call him kink light. He's really vanilla plus, but I give him kink light. But he's so supportive. He's my number one cheerleader in what I do, in everything. And like, it's so possible. And for me, I think that's how I challenge the status quo, is by like being able to be out there and be proud and out there. I know a lot of people can't, so I don't expect everyone to be out there. And so I choose to be out there because I can, but also like showing people that you can have all these other things only because you're a sex worker or a pro-dom or whatever, or only because you have these kinks and fetishes doesn't mean you can't have love and partnerships and friendships and family and support. It's all possible.
Hear, hear.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. After speaking to Miss Shayla at a previous, I think it was, we had a conversation on Instagram, I wrote a blog piece really based on the information that I got from her. So full credit to her, about how to be a good partner to a sex worker. And to this day, it is the number one blog piece that gets read on the Curious Fox website. That's awesome. Is like, it ranks number one on Facebook, on Google. We look at our numbers, and it is like by far, I don't mean like a little bit, but by far the most popular piece that we put out there. So it's a minefield. And if listeners, if you're dating a sex worker, read that blog, get your act together, be a good partner.
That's awesome.
Okay, so last but not least, as always, what are you curious about lately?
What am I? I feel like I'm a curious person in general. Like, I think that's what makes me really good at my job. My partner says this all the time. He's just like, your curiosity is crazy. You want to know, like, to the simplest things, from like watching a show, being like, why do I know her? And then looking her up, looking at her Wikipedia, going onto her social media. I was like, oh, do you know she's dating blah, blah, blah? And he's just like, why do you need to know any of this? Or like, do you know this movie is based on this thing? And then I apply that into like my like exploration of sex and sexuality. Like, I am always curious about people's kinks and their fantasies, and where do they think it came from, and and how do they want to explore it, and where we can go from it. I'm just like, I think curiosity is one of the best things you can have in just life in general. I want to, I've traveled all over the world and continue. I want to explore cultures and people. I just want to know everything as much as possible. So it's hard for me to answer just one thing, because I just want all the things. Like, I'm always like, well, how does this work? And I'm just curious. I just want to know all of it. Nice. And now I want to put a fig in someone's butt, to be honest. I will say that. I do like putting things in people's butts.
Nice. Yes. Why not? I mean, that's the whole thing. That's the whole.
We're going to be speaking a little bit about pegging soon. So yes, we will.
Yes, exactly.
This is the perfect transition. She loves things in people's butts. I love things in people's butts.
Yes. And we are going to explore things in butts for sure. Lucy, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom, what you know about Daddy, and breaking it down for us. And it's been so enlightening for me. It's like we said at the beginning, it's been such a hot topic for me for such a long time. It's been like a real curiosity, and I feel like you've shed light. Now I'm gonna, it's still there. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll go there and find something interesting. So I appreciate
Maybe
that.
you're more of a mommy, or maybe you need a mommy. Maybe you need one of those instead of a daddy.
Now I want to know about mommy. It's actually in my notes to ask you about mommy.
I know, we're gonna have to do another episode about mommy now.
We're gonna have to do a whole other episode on mommy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We did it finally. We did an episode on Daddy.
Yay! Properly, like, does that side of your brain feel calm now?
Yes.
Or now are there more questions? Are you like, but now about mommy?
Totally. I mean, I'm always going to have more questions, but what I feel is like there's a part of my brain that is satisfied because I got answers. And I also spoke to somebody who embodies Daddy and also like even subverts the idea of Daddy, which is already subversive, right? So I feel like that part of my brain is really satisfied. I'm like, oh yeah. And she's so knowledgeable, and like I said in the interview, like she's so accessible and she's so light, and so I feel like I do have a better understanding of Daddy now. I understand why people go there, and I also got to know her better and how she goes about it. And I love that she's a cis female pro-dom that is embodying Daddy. Like that is also like
that's on the asexual spectrum and embodied Daddy.
Exactly. That like totally titillates my brain. I'm like, ooh, what an interesting person. So I feel great. That felt really good. And I would say like my
I think you got more joy and satisfaction from that than when your partners were like asking you to use the word daddy in sex. Like you seem more chill now.
Totally. I think you're right. And I think that was, my main takeaway from this is that how it's a gender neutral term. That it's not really about gender, but it's more about energy. And it's, it's not literal, it's energetic. And it's an embodiment of various archetypes that are, in our world, in our literature, been around for a long time. So I thought that was my biggest takeaway. And the fact that she was talking about Daddy in this kind of way and how she embodies it. I'm like, oh, like that makes more sense to me. That was my big takeaway. And the other piece was almost on the other side of it is when she talked about it just being a word. And I can see both sides of that I find like the energy that people talk about, like the energy that you talk about and you play with and the way that she talks about it, I'm attracted to the energy. I think it's the word. And I think it's because I'm a wordy kind of person. Like words mean a lot to me. And I think I get stuck on the word because the energy that you're all talking about, I'm like, yeah, that's great. Like, I want to go there. I want to play that is. And I have played in those spaces. I just haven't, I just didn't use the word daddy, and I get stuck on the word, and it just throws me into the confusion that I mentioned. At the same time, I also heard her when she said, look, it's just a word. Like, don't get hung up on it so much. It's just a part of play. It doesn't have to mean so much. Just like get into the space and enjoy it. And like, don't get so hung up on the word. It's just a word. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. And I heard her on that too. I think it's probably what made me shift. I'm like, oh, maybe like next time it comes up and I'm with I don't particularly think I'm going to seek it, but if it comes up in a scene, I now have the inspiration and permission to be like, you know what, it's just a word. Like, it doesn't really matter. And like stay in the scene and enjoy it and see what happens. So those are really like my like big takeaways.
Or create a new word. Just be like, now Jeffrey is the word, or kiwi, or just be like, yes, strawberry. Like, just find the word that embodies that energy for you. Just, challenge the status quo. We're using daddy doesn't mean you need to.
Oh, Teddy. Teddy's a good one. Like a teddy bear.
Teddy, yes.
Oh, hey, Teddy. Oh, hello.
Oh, look at this. Look at this.
Oh, yeah.
A Teddy was just born. I love it. I love it very much.
Now I just need a play button. I apply with it.
Our DMs are like, bing, 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 bing. I think what I loved about the conversation was I love whenever on our podcast we take something that we're like, oh yeah, we're doing that thing. And we're like, wait, why are we doing that thing? What does that mean? What does it look like? And like start unpacking it. So even the conversation with Miss Shayla when she was talking about water sports and the different reasons why people may be drawn to it, because it could be about worshiping, it could be about being humiliated, it could be about, I was like, oh yeah, there are reasons why we do things. And so Mistress Lucy referenced Sunny Megatron and her article. And if you go to the website, sunnymegatron.com, she has an article on the 7 fundamental characters of Daddy Dominant. And Mistress Lucy referenced that about being, you know, someone's fan, being confidant, being protector, a teacher, a guide, an anchor, disciplinarian, like all of those different characteristics that are explored. And I thought that was fascinating because I could see people either owning some of those or picking and choosing some, but really to your point saying, this is the energy, this is the big dick, big strap on, big daddy energy that I want to bring to a space or that I want to receive and I want to let go and be taken care of and punished accordingly.
Yeah. Great. I'm so glad we got this off. At least my chest.
Yes.
Yeah. No, super interesting. Yeah, super interesting.
If you want to find more about Mistress Lucy Sweetkill, you can find her on Instagram at lucy.sweetkill and on Twitter at Lucy Sweetkill, or you can also connect with her on Night Flirt and OnlyFans by going to her website, lucysweetkill.com/directory. And while you are on websites and online, you know what I'm going to say? Go to ours. Particularly if you're interested in that article that Effy referenced that she did as a result of having conversation with Miss Shayla about how to be a great partner to a sex worker. It is our most popular blog post by far. If you want to go know why, then you need to go to our website and find out. And while you're there, you're going to be able to click on links that'll take you to our Instagram and our Facebook at We Are Curious Foxes. And that We Are Curious Foxes will also be your guide and your entry through the door of Patreon, where not only are you going to find some behind the scenes footage, including some little snippets of conversation that we just had with Mistress Lucy that we did not put in the podcast, but that will live on Patreon. You can go find it there, as well as mini episodes and over 50 videos from educator-led workshops that we have done over the years. That will help us not only give you more information, but you will be able to support us and this work in that way. And you can also support us by subscribing on Apple or following us on Spotify and Stitcher. And while you're there, share this with someone else, do a rating, add a comment, all of those things let us know that you are listening. And if you want to be heard, then you have a few ways to do that as well. You can email us or send us a voice memo at listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com, or you can record a question for the show by calling 201-870-0063.
This episode is produced and edited by Nina Pollock, who brings her warm, caretaking energy to every episode. Our intro music is composed by Dave Saha. We are so grateful for their work, and we're grateful to you for listening. As always, stay curious, friends. Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.